Hi everyone, and welcome to week 2 of Quality and Performance Management in Healthcare. This week we're going to talk about mechanics of change and transitioning to teams. So I guess a good way to frame this week is kind of an introduction part 2. Not necessarily going to get into quality and improvement methodology or tools that you would use. However, mechanics of change and then the team setting are two very critical components of quality and performance in healthcare. And so we're going to lay that foundation, and then later on in subsequent weeks, we'll talk about how to tie everything together to effectively make change within an organization. First up, we're talking about mechanics of change. So quality improvement is change, right? And that's pretty self-explanatory. If I have a process, nothing's going to get better if I don't change something at some point along that process. Everything we do in regards to quality and even performance management is focused around changing something. There's the evaluation component, yes, that's key, but at the end of the day, we're trying to change something to make the outcome better. So we're going to walk through basically the foundations of change and how to go about that. So whereas change may be instituted by one individual, the most effective way to change and keep that change in place is through teams. Now, I wanted to highlight this at the very beginning, both because it talks about change and utilizing teams and various groups of people to help enact that change. But it's really important to understand that you yourself are not going to change an entire organization without the help of a group of people. Now, you can look at it from the way of, if I'm the quality manager in a hospital setting and I go to the board of directors and I say, I've done evaluations, I've found inefficiencies, I want to enact this change. And let's say, just for the sake of ease, we're talking about change in the OR room, and it has to do with nurses charting during the procedure. I can make that change, or I can put in policy to change the way that we do things. But if I don't have that team of nurses that are bought into that change, it's not going to happen. So you have to be able to work in a team setting. You have to be able to work with a wide array of individuals, whether it's nurses, doctors, cleaning staff, food staff, anything that fits under the roof of the organization in which you're working. You have to be able to work with them as a team to make sure that when you institute that change sticks. Another really important thing to keep in mind is that just because you enact a change, it doesn't mean it's going to be a positive change, okay? So change simply means a difference from the status quo. It can be good, it can be bad. We can use quality principles and we can use quality methodology to tip the scales of chance that change is going to be beneficial for everyone. But we have to keep in the back of our head that just because I'm putting in a quality initiative that changes a process, it doesn't mean it's actually going to improve anything. There are many cases where quality improvement initiatives have actually been detrimental for the end user. So we just have to keep that in mind whenever we're designing anything. And we'll talk about this in a later lecture, but it emphasizes the importance of ongoing evaluation even after you implement a quality initiative. Now this slide and the next slide, you might be looking at it and thinking, what does this have to do with change, right? We're looking at traditional views of a working environment, a working structure, an organizational culture. And in the next slide, we're talking about kind of the quote unquote new way of doing things. Now, first thing I should say is that this is a little deceiving because it does say traditional view. Just bear in mind that just because it says traditional versus the new way of doing things, a lot of places still use the traditional framework, right? A lot of places that I've assisted with have a very traditional view of how things should run. I've also worked in that new beliefs way of working. You're going to have to adapt to the different environments. The reason we talk about it here is because when we're talking about enacting change within an organization, there's no one size fits all kind of thing, right? I need to understand the framework in which I'm working within. and that's going to really adjust how I instill change. So for example, if I'm working a traditional framework like this, where respect for authority is expected, it's almost kind of easier for me to enact change because I need the buy-in of the leaders. If I have the buy-in of the leaders, even though what I said on the earlier slide about having a team backing you and having that buy-in, with the traditional view of working, I have the kind of the boss's ear. The boss is on board for the change. They tell their supervisors tell their workers, and it's expected that people are just going to do it, right? If they don't, they get written up, all this kind of stuff. In the worst case scenarios I've seen, the change is enacted. If you don't follow along with the change, there's just staff turnover, whether that's people are terminated for whatever reason, or people quit because they don't believe in it, and then people are hired on, and this is the new work environment that they work in. I'm not saying that's a way to go about change. It's actually probably a bad way to go about it. You never want staff turnover if you can help it. But all that to say, these two frameworks are important to understand and frame how you approach change. In that regard, traditional view of working, so we have a power structure that is from the top down. So everything comes from the top, whether it's board of directors, CEO, so on and so forth. As mentioned, there's a respect for authority that is expected, right? Someone tells you to do something, and without question, you're going to do it. There's no room for questions. Well, that's the extreme, but there's minimal questioning. You're just going to go do what you're told. Sacrifice for the organization is expected. So what that means is you're expected that you're just going to work overtime, no questions asked, right? You're going to have your phone on the weekend, right? That's the old way of looking at it. The idea of people like being taken care of. Supervision and control is necessary. Now this is kind of interesting because we saw this as COVID wound down. Some workplaces where we need to get these people back in the office right now because they need supervision. We need to make sure they're doing work. Other places believed in the model of supervision isn't necessary. People actually work better from home. The data is mixed on that, but I think there's a good case for the new way of thinking, which we'll talk about in a second. That people don't necessarily need to be micromanaged or supervised very tightly. Also, we have postponement of gratification is the norm. Work is work. That's it. You go to work, do your job, go home, and then have your hobbies there. And the mode is one of being cautious, safe, and compliant. So not a lot of risk taking. Again, what I can say is when you're working inside this kind of framework, when you approach the CEO or board of directors with any sort of change initiative, it's not usually met with open ears or enthusiasm. And this is because there is that kind of mindset of being cautious, safe, compliant. We don't kind of travel outside of the norm. So it is a little harder to get the ball rolling. But in this kind of framework, once you get that ball rolling, because it's top down, it usually picks up momentum pretty quickly. On to the new beliefs about work. What I should say before we kind of dive into these points, while I've presented it as kind of a dichotomy, right, it's either one or the other, there is kind of a molding between the two. So don't be surprised if you are in the workplace and you see that you are in like a top-down organization, but there is that belief that people can manage themselves. It can go hand in hand. It can change based on the needs of everything, right? Especially with over the course of COVID, the idea that people don't need supervision. There are workplaces that believe in that, but at the same time, authority is to be respected. So you can work at home for all you want, but the minute they say get into the office for this meeting, you are expected to be there with no pushback. That does exist. In regards to the new beliefs about work, so power is shared and not based on position. So you have kind of that open boardroom concept. Anyone can throw out ideas, anyone can question ideas without any kind of punishment expected or getting an earful about how you need to just be quiet at meetings, so on and so forth. The idea that people can manage themselves, so we've talked about this a little bit, but you don't need that kind of micromanage. You can task things out and let people go do their stuff. Then they come back, and as long as they meet their due dates, typically. Outcome and accomplishment is respected. So it's about the work you put out, not about the position you hold. Short-term reward is also more important. Individual needs are important as well. The idea that work can and should be satisfying, so you believe in what you're doing, that you're excited to show up for work, that it's not just kind of a place that you go for 8 hours out of your day or 12 hours out of your day and then go home and be a completely different person. People prefer to be in control of themselves. So again, kind of more autonomy in terms of what you're doing and less micromanagement. And this is a big one. Growth requires risks and mistakes are acceptable. Now this is both good news and bad news for us. It's good because change, or I should say suggestions for change, are usually welcomed with open ears and open arms. However, in this kind of model, you do need the entire organization, or at least the entire team that's being affected by that change, to really buy in to enact it, right? With the idea that people can manage themselves, and people prefer to be in control of themselves. The real issue here is that you risk wanting to put in a change, someone saying, I know the job better than you can ever know it, which isn't necessarily true, to be honest. But forgive me for how I'm about to say it, but saying your idea is stupid, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do things how I always do. And then that change initiative, all that work you've done, evaluations and whatnot, it all kind of goes out the window. So while it's easier to present the change, it's harder to get that momentum really going sometimes, depending on the idea. Now, tying into all that, the quality of healthcare really depends on the work of an interdisciplinary team. So again, kind of going back to that new way of thinking about work, we really need to be working within a team, and we need to be working well within that team so that we can enact our change, everyone's on the same page, and we can improve the quality of care that people are receiving. All right, so you'll notice that we're going to start moving away from talking about change and slowly making that transition to talking about teams, team functioning, successful teams. We have a little bit of intermixing between successful change implementation and team formation and working within a team. They are linked, right? Because you may be in kind of like a quality department by your own, but every single quality initiative that you do is going to have some sort of team associated with it. The other reason, and just full disclosure, I also just follow the kind of the outline of the textbook, right? That's strictly to avoid confusion, but it made sense to group all these things together. So we're going to talk about kind of leading from change into that team and team environment. So in this slide, we're talking about what makes a successful team. First of all, that team, it's basically a group of people working together to achieve a common goal, right? You can outline your team and say, okay, you guys are my quality team for the OR procedure that we're going to tackle in the next 6 to 9 months. Or a team can strictly just be the group of people that are invested in making that change and seeing an improvement in a particular service. So there's 3 essential criteria for a successful team. Now, I have seen successful teams that kind of go outside of these 3 criteria, but this is kind of the common factor, right? So the first is small size. So we're talking about 5 to 9 people max. The reason we want a small team is that we can enable regular face-to-face conversation and communication. As teams get kind of bigger, one of 2 things happens. People compete for space to talk, right? And not everyone can be heard. And then the other thing that happens is people kind of recede and fade into the shadows. As that group gets bigger, people don't want to talk as much, right? So one of 2 things can happen. The second criteria for a successful team is shared goals. So these shared goals are on a specific project with a definite timeline. So think of like the SMART acronym for goal setting, something like that. Really important that all team members are on the same page when it's talking about goals. It's usually one of the most important things to outline this right at the onset and make sure everyone understands it. The third criteria is that team should be interdisciplinary. So you want members bringing different viewpoints and perspectives to the table. Sometimes number 1 and number 3 can conflict just because of the amount of players that you need at that table discussing a particular initiative, right? Now, it's rare that you'll have 9 different disciplines at a table trying to sort things out, but it's not impossible. It does happen. And oftentimes what will happen is a department or a discipline will want to have not just one member on the team, they'll want 2 or they'll want 3. So it's your job to kind of manage that and kind of quell the expectations of, nope, we need one representative. They're going to bring everything back to you, and they're going to bring all your viewpoints forward. So pick that representative well. So we also have criteria critical to the success of a team. So our first bullet here is norms and rules of conduct exist and are adhered to regarding the processes. So these need to be outlined right at the onset. These can include things on how team members communicate with each other, how meetings are going to roll out, how often meetings occur, deadlines, if you're not going to make a deadline, what to do. But people need to know how to act and operate within the setting of the team. The next is when members disagree, they are willing to engage in respectful conflict resolution in a positive manner. So you really don't want kind of the hot-headed surgeon on the quality team who's going to turn around and yell at the nurse on the team just because they don't get along, right? You need to have every individual on that team who is able to engage in respectful conflict resolution. They talk out disagreements, why they're not seeing eye to eye, why one idea might work better than the other, and the team is going to be a part of that process. But when 2 individuals get heated, when they start yelling at each other, when they're unwilling to engage in positive conflict resolution, the team can't really step in. It actually puts the team at a disadvantage. Members identify and establish resources to use when required. The next one, this is a pretty important point. Leadership is fluid based on who has the best expertise in the current area of need, despite a formal leader being identified. So if you're the quality lead at a organization, chances are you will be leading the team in general. However, you must be able to pass off that leadership depending on what area of expertise is needed. If we're talking about a hip replacement and we're trying to decide on, I don't know, several different products to use, I'm probably going to let the surgeon on the team lead that discussion because I have no idea what I'm talking about. I might know a little bit about it or I might have a good understanding, but the surgeon is an expert in this area. He should be leading, or she should be leading the charge to really determine what is best for the initiative. Mistakes are seen as a learning opportunity and as a growth opportunity. Now this one's really important because with quality improvement, sometimes we're throwing out ideas that at first glance might not make any sense, right? We're sticking our toes out past the line and pushing the boundaries, right? The best analogy I can use here is if I want to get stronger, I have to add more weight to the bar, right? I go to the gym, I do bench press, let's say. Now, every now and then, I'm going to put on too much weight, and I'm going to have to rely on that spotter to take the barbell off of me, right? Because I went a little bit too far, I tried to improve a little bit too quick. It's going to happen. If I weight lift enough, it's going to happen. Same kind of with quality improvement. I'm going to push the envelope to maximize efficiencies. Every now and then, we're human, we're going to make a bad call. We do our best to limit it, but we can't see them as kind of I guess a failure or the be all and end all. It's a mistake, it's happened, correct it, move on, know not to do that again. The last point here is clear basic roles and work assignments are distinguished for each team member as well as backup responsibilities for other team members. So I can't tell you the amount of times I've worked in a team setting and we break away to go do our different projects and 2 people come back doing the exact same thing because they didn't know their role clear enough. Really make sure people know what they're doing, what work is assigned to them. That just makes the quality team efficient, ironically. As well as having backups are important. things happen, right? You might have a team member who has to go away on a family emergency. Have someone who can backfill that role. Cross training is not a bad thing. Most organizations will do that, but just keep that in mind. All right, so we're going to talk about the components of communication and the communication process. This is important and often overlooked, in my opinion, strictly because communication is the main way that you're going to have a successful team. If you're not communicating well, the team is most likely not going to gel together. Ideas are going to be dropped, important messages missed or important information missed, and that's a good way to go down an avenue towards a poor quality initiative. All messages or communications start with the sender. So this is the person with the message to deliver, obviously. Now that sender has a few things they have to consider. They have to consider who the receiver is. They have to consider the purpose of their message before they can even start constructing it, right? Who am I sending this to and why? Then I have to look at the size and length of the message and then the ability of that message to get attention. So these last two things, the size and length of the message and the ability to get attention, are intertwined, right? If I write you a very long email, like your entire screen is filled, and I could have said it in 2 sentences, I don't know about any of you, but chances are I'm going to open that up. I'm probably going to groan. I'm going to scan it for the important little pieces in it, not too attentively either. So there is a chance that you're going to miss that, or I should say the receiver is going to miss information in it. Now, compare that with a message that's constructed that is concise and to the point. Obviously, have your niceties in the email. Hello, I hope this email finds you well. 2 or 3 sentences for what you are trying to get across, and then your sign off. That person can read that, consume those 2 to 3 sentences. They're not going into it already kind of annoyed that you sent them a novel for a couple sentences worth of information. Now, in between the sender and the construction of the message is a filter. So this is something placed between the source and the sender and the receiver, right? So we're going to come across a couple different filters. The first one is between the sender and the message as the message being constructed. Now it can be a physical boundary or it can be a cognitive one. We'll focus on the cognitive one. The cognitive one is a stereotype or a bias. So if I'm trying to get a message across and I'm trying to recall events from 2 days ago, I might have a recall bias and I might have viewed an event and put a spin on it that's not factually true. That's going to filter the message that I produce. We have to be aware of those as best as we can so that we can address those and try to get the message through with minimal filter. The message is obviously the content of what is being sent to the receiver. That's pretty straightforward. And then as we send it off, as you'll see, we're going to come into a couple other filters. So on that last slide, we had another filter right before the receiver. They're basically one and the same, to be completely honest. The receiver, obviously the intended target of the message, but they have their own filters, right? They have their own stereotypes and biases that we have to work with. It's going to be something, if we know that they exist, this is something that we have to keep in mind when we construct the message. The next aspect is listening. So the message content is received and absorbed by the intended target. Remember, these are this process of listening is affected by those filters that were applied. Now, typically, there's going to be some form of feedback, right? This is going to tell you how well your message got across, right? Now, when I send off an email, I'll typically write it in a way that the person who's receiving it has to give me feedback in one way, shape, or form, just so that I know that they got the message, they understand what was being put into the message, and if not, we can have communication to rectify the confusion. So the feedback is the response sent back from the receiver to the sender. It follows basically that same communication process as well. Now, the feedback can be positive, so they're agreeing with the message, or it can be negative with disagreement. Now, that agreement or disagreement, like I said, can stem from confusion or those filters get in the way. So it's really important that we make sure that that message gets through as clear as possible. Now moving on to conflict. So we talked about conflict a little bit before. Conflict is bound to happen at some point, especially as we're trying to enact change. There's going to be disagreements. We can have positive and negative conflict. Negative conflict is when there's no conflict resolution practice or policy in place. What happens is there's a tension that's created among the team members, and the team tends to stray from their objectives, right? This is pretty self-explanatory. You can think about if you go on vacation with your friends, right? You're in the car with 4 friends, 2 of them start to argue. No one really has any conflict resolution skills. They just start insulting each other. Now that entire trip, say it was a week-long trip, there's going to be tension there. It's not going to be as great as you all thought it was as you departed. Might even end up calling off the vacation, coming home early, whatever, right? It's the same sort of thing in the team setting. No conflict resolution creates tension. Team members can stray so far apart that the quality initiative falls apart, right? That quality initiative falls apart. That change that we talked about at the beginning of the lecture, that change we're trying to enact, that also falls apart. That can actually have negative consequences if you are in the midst of rolling out the change. We also have positive conflict. So this is when conflict resolution is in place and it is practiced. So it says team members remain level-headed. Now that's not often the case. Anytime there's conflict, people are bound to get angry. But with good conflict resolution in place, they might be angry, but when they're sitting at that table, they're not going to throw insults, they're not going to flip tables or anything egregious. There's going to be some form of mediation to kind of head off the conflict before it heads that way. So there is essential conflict that contributes to decision making and problem solving, but this tends to bring the team closer together and closer to their goal. And this is kind of that aspect of going through difficult times with a group of people. It tends to bring people closer rather than tear them apart. No different than a quality team, right? You're going to have bumps along the way. You're going to have arguments. Working through them with a good conflict resolution practice is going to bring the team together rather than tear it apart. Believe it or not, we think about conflict, we think about yelling at each other, we think about people storming out of rooms, but there are benefits to a well-managed conflict. The first benefit is done through listening, right? So through conflict, through arguments, through discussions, disagreements, there may be a development of diverse ideas and points of view. If you're listening, these are things that you can pick up and implement towards the project. You can also gain a broader understanding of the problem at hand. You might be viewing the problem one-dimensionally. When conflict occurs, you're seeing another dimension of the problem. You're seeing it from a different angle. This can open up problem-solving avenues. The next benefit is opened up through encouraging. So the team has more options and alternatives with regard to a final decision when conflict occurs, right? If there's conflict, it means there's disagreement. It means there's more than one idea on the table. You have a diverse array of options and alternatives in regard to making that decision. That's a good thing, believe it or not. The next one, energizing. So there is energy from potential conflict that can stimulate a team, right? You can take a very boring and dull room with a team that's not really doing much. 2 people get into a disagreement, and all of a sudden the team is going to jolt into action. Kind of something to get the same sort of point across. I don't know how many of you are hockey fans, but back in the day, I think it's changed a little bit now. There's not so many big hits in the game. But back in the day, when they used to also have fights, when there was that kind of conflict in a game, it amped up the team of whoever the winning fighter was from, right? So your team might be down 2-1. You send out the brawler gets into a fight, he wins the fight. The team's now amped up from that conflict. It works the same way in this environment. Now, that's not, don't go out and get into fist fights in your quality teams. It's just to say that conflict and the energy that arises within a conflict can stimulate a team, right? Remember, positive conflict and conflict resolution. We don't want hockey-esque brawls in the boardroom. It can also encourage commitment towards achieving a final goal. Now with conflict resolution, there's a positive view on conflict, okay? So these are things we have to keep in mind to make sure that we have healthy conflict resolution. The first is openness. So we don't want to push conflict under the rug. We want to tackle it head on, and we want to keep our minds open. So it's not, you know, if Tom on my team starts arguing with Melissa, I'm not going to say, okay, you know what, guys, let's just move on. We'll deal with this later. We have other things to tackle. Now's the time to tackle it before those kind of disagreements can fester and be made worse. Now, oftentimes there's issues over personality. So there has to be kind of a grounding that there's a conflict at hand, but it's not about who brought it up, right? You're going to have different personalities at the table. Some of those personalities aren't going to get along. We have to look past the personality into the idea, right? Just being completely honest, I've worked on teams where the person I've liked the least on the team has come up with the best idea, right? And that's just, we never got along, but they had a great idea. The idea kind of trumps any sort of issues over personality. Avoid blame, right? The worst thing you can do is point fingers, which ends up running in circles, right? I can't say I've ever seen a positive interaction with someone who pointed a finger. It's often, it's like that Spider-Man meme I'm sure you've all seen, where there's 3 Spider-Men pointing at each other, circular. I think there's also an episode in The Office that does the same sort of thing, where they're trying to solve the murder mystery. It's funny because it's true. That's what happens. You point a finger, someone's going to point the finger back. Now we're all just yelling at each other. Avoid pointing fingers, avoid blame. Focus on the ideas. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is it is a team issue, right? It might be a disagreement between 2 people, but the concept is you succeed as a team or you fail as a team, right? So the team can be involved in conflict resolution. It's not kind of Tom and Melissa are fighting with each other, let's lock them in the boardroom and everyone leave until they sort it out. We're going to tackle it as a team. That usually helps to cool the levels down, especially when the team is also bouncing ideas back and forth and grounding the conversation. Next, we're going to fundamental decision-making issues. So there are a few different issues that arise that incorporate decision-making. So the first is the understanding of financial information. So this understanding of financial information assists with a risk first benefit cost analysis. Now the problem with that is that it requires an understanding of return on investment, cost, and budget. Typically that's why I include kind of like a financial specialist on my quality teams, because that stuff can get confusing. It can lead to issues with decision making, especially when you don't understand it. Having someone who's specialized in that on your team is very important. Then you have data-driven decisions. So for confidence in decisions, we should be relying on data, right? We should also be relying on how it's collected and how it will be analyzed. So I can have literally thousands of entries of data, but if they were collected poorly and there's no consistency in how it was collected, that data, that 1,000 entry points of data is most likely useless, right? This kind of goes back to research methodologies. We have to make sure that our data collection, our analysis processes are correct, and then we can have confidence in the decisions that we make based on that data. A lot of the times, how do I frame this? A lot of the times there are issues with the data at hand, right? Unless there's been a comprehensive analytics team, really be careful with your data. Then we have systematic problem solving, right? So we want to be rational. We want decisions that are made to be repeatable so they can follow the methodology that we used. And this involves process development. Talking about kind of the decision-making process and having repeatable decision, we do have decision-making tools that can help us. So I'm going to present 3 here. These are not the be-all and end-all. There are many different decision-making tools, but we're just going to scratch the surface. And I'm going to leave it up to you guys to kind of dig further into the tools you want to use or not use. I find it's something that's completely personal and what makes sense to you. So the tools that we're going to talk about, we have 8D, so it reduces or eliminates the root cause of the problem. It's based on the scientific method. We have the 5 whys, which assists in identification of underlying causes by asking sequential whys. It may take a minimum of 5 questions. This route, I also call this the toddler method. So anyone who has a toddler or niece and nephew who is, about 2, you'll notice that they'll come up, they'll ask you a question. They'll say like, why is the sky blue? And you're like, well, you give them the answer and they go, well, why? You think about it, you give them the answer and they look at you and say, well, why? And at this point, you're starting to get annoyed and you're trying to scrounge for more answers, and you give them the minimal answer and they'll keep asking why until you'll say like, I don't know, go ask someone else, right? That's essentially what we're doing with the 5 whys. You just keep asking why until you can't answer it anymore. Then there's the is not. It focuses on the true problem by asking what is and what is not. So we'll get into it in a little bit more detail. So the 8D decision-making tool, the process that you're going to go through with this, so you're going to prepare. You're going to decide whether the situation at hand requires a formal approach or not. Next up, you're going to form the team. So you're going to select the individuals who will participate. And the big criteria here is that those participants must have a direct interest in the outcome, right? We don't want to include people who really, they might be slightly impacted by the outcome, but they don't really care about it, right? I'm thinking like the SAs in the OR setting for like a hip replacement. They're not really going to care about an initiative discussing about the process of the hip replacement. It just doesn't have really an impact on them necessarily, so we're not going to include them in that initiative. Next, we're going to describe. So we're going to identify and quantify the problem fully using all indicators possible. And in later lectures, we're going to talk more in detail about indicators and how to kind of develop our own or identify the best possible ones. Next, we're going to isolate. So we're going to prevent the infiltration of the problem from the next process or customer. So basically, you could say this is containment as well. And then cause identification. So a lot of these tools end up here, and that's ask why to determine and understand the root cause. So a lot of time with decision making, we're just trying to determine that root cause. Like I said, there's tons of different ways that we can end up at root cause, and we're just scratching the surface here. Next, we're going to test. So we're going to verify identified solutions. This requires proof you have accounted for the risks, right? So we don't want to necessarily put something in that's risky and bound to backfire. We want to make sure we eliminate all risks that we can. Corrective action. So first, we're going to eliminate that root cause. Second, we're going to verify the effectiveness of the actions quantitatively. And third, we're going to go back and correct a defective product if it exists, okay? So we're fixing the problem, and then we're generating the data to say, look, I fixed this. And then when we generate that data, it says we didn't fix it, we have to go back and correct it again. Really important, I should mention, to generate the data to say, look, we did this, it works. Here's what it looked like before with my indicators. This is what it looks like after the change with my indicators. Because there's always going to be someone who holds you accountable. Next, we have prevention. So we're going to modify policies, procedures, and systems to prevent this problem from reoccurring. And then recognition, and this is also important, we didn't talk about before. You want to recognize the success of your team. Now, you might not have the ability to give them a bonus or anything like that, but just recognizing the success of the team. You'd be surprised how far a $5 TIM card goes to the team after you do a successful initiative, especially if they didn't have to participate in it. But showing the appreciation does go quite a long way. All right, next up we have the 5 whys. So like I said, this is the quote-unquote toddler method. So we're sequentially asking why until we get to the root of the problem. The general rule is that we're going to ask why at least 5 times. So we're going to focus on 3 fundamental questions to start. The first is, what is wrong with what? And then ask why. Do you know why the problem occurs on this particular stage or service? And then do you know why to test operational definition? All right, so the general steps. So first, we're going to describe the problem. Second, we're going to identify and outline why that problem occurs. 3, we're going to repeat step 2 until all clear answers materialize. So again, just continuously ask why to the point of annoyance. 4 is enact appropriate corrective actions. If problem is eliminated, then we stop here. And then we document the steps that we took. If the problem persists, we're going to repeat step 4 and just utilize different problem-solving techniques. So we're just going to keep trying to fix the problem that we identified. Sometimes we might have to go back and ask why a bunch more times and really rack our brain to see if we have the true root cause or if we could have gone a few steps more, and then try another corrective action. So that has happened to me before. It is possible with this methodology. So is not. Now I'm not a big fan of this one. I'll be straight up. I don't know it too well. It is generally used to identify what is and what is not within the scope of being considered at a particular moment in time. I find this is something that is just naturally done. You pretty much know the scope of the problem that you're tackling. It is beneficial during times at which you're stuck in problem-solving processes. Again, it's not something I've generally gravitated towards. I find, I just find that it's naturally done. There is a table in the textbook, table 3.5, to reference, but I will say it's not something that you have to worry about for tests or exams. If it's something that interests you, definitely check out table 3.5, but like I said, if you're doing problem solving, you're probably already doing the is not method. All right, so we've spent some time talking about teams already and the team environment, but we're going to talk about team formation and transitioning to teams now. There is a bit of an important point here. Putting individuals together to work towards a common goal creates a group of people. It doesn't create a team. A team is more time intensive and energy consuming. It requires additional training. That team itself, they need to be able to work together well. And as just said, that takes time. You can think of it in terms of sports. You can think of it in terms of, other avenues. You can take a group of people, you can put them on the same quote unquote sports team, and they might not jive right away. It takes time to build that kind of cohesive group that forms the team and all the benefits that come along with being a team. So it does take a great amount of work to create that team and to create a cohesive team in particular. So it really does sound like a simple step, but there are a lot of moving pieces that we have to take into consideration and that we have to address before we get an efficient, kind of well-oiled team that works very efficiently. There's 4 key elements to team formation to keep in mind. So the first one is shared goals among team members. We've already talked about this. We need everyone to be working all in the same direction. They need to have a reason for working in a team environment, and you have to have a reason for bringing people together to work in a team environment. There needs to be interdependence, so the team members need to rely on each other at some point in time. Otherwise, it's just a group of people kind of going in the same direction, not really needing to communicate with one another. And the 4th element is the ability of the team members to depend on one another due to the differing skill sets that are brought forth. So having that interdisciplinary nature of that team, where if they acted on the initiative by themselves, they have blind spots that are not going to be able to tackle the tasks efficiently or completely. But in that team environment, those blind spots disappear, and there can be a comprehensive attempt at tackling a problem. So teams function at different management levels. We have the management committee. It typically sets policy for organization. It's assisted by director or manager of quality. The committee typically provides overall direction and guidance to the organization. We also have steering committees. This assists in maintaining consistency within the organization. Members typically don't interact day to day, and it usually consists of at least one individual from each department, including things like legal, HR, communication, so on and so forth. There's divisional quality improvement, so staff level teams that guide and support kind kind of at the local level and are a little bit more specialized. Then we have the quality improvement team, which is the frontline quality team who addresses issues as they arise. Membership should include members from all departments. When it says that, we're just talking about an interdisciplinary team at kind of the more local level. Not every organization is constructed in this way. This is pointed out just to really highlight the divisional quality improvement and the quality improvement team. You will have those two levels where, depending on the environment that you work in, there'll be a divisional quality improvement, which is basically like the brand, right? So if I look at long-term care, like Extendicare has a divisional quality improvement that looks at quality across the board of the entire enterprise, right? You can be working in Toronto and working in Trenton, and the divisional quality improvement is going to look at your scores and see what's going on. The quality improvement team would be the team within the facility itself. So it's important to know both aspects of that. Divisional quality improvement teams typically set kind of your benchmarks when we start talking about indicators and whatnot. The quality improvement team at the ground level is typically generating site-specific improvement initiatives. And then what I've seen often happen is something's developed at one site, the divisional quality team comes in to see what's going on, says that's a great idea, and then we'll implement it across the broader enterprise. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Now what we're more focused on is the formation of that quality initiative team. So the one at the specific site, right? Because if you're getting into the world of quality, chances are you're more than likely starting there. Now, in the formation of this team, there's always a chairperson. This is basically the leader. This person should be well respected, and they should understand and believe in quality systems. So when this person speaks, people listen, right? They're known for whether it's their credentials or the outcomes of their work, their accomplishments. You need that person in the leader role. Think back to instituting change. If you have someone who is well accomplished saying we need to change something, more people are typically going to get behind that change rather than if it's the rookie who just got hired a month ago who's leading the change initiative. This person needs to be open-minded, objective, and results-oriented. Typically avoid choosing either quality manager or executive for this position, as potential conflicts of interest or political implications may transpire. So sometimes it's unavoidable to have the quality manager in this position because the quality manager might be the only person in the quality department. That does happen. You do what you can. Next up, you have the administrator. So similar characteristics of the leader, but this person's also good at organizing. They can be in charge of agenda and minutes for meetings, as well as tackle the support needs of the team. And they may be required in full-time capacity. So like I said, not everyone has a full quality department. If there's a quality department, chances are there's someone to act as an administrator full-time. If not, you're going to have to borrow someone and kind of recruit them to your team. Another point, agenda and meeting minutes are very important, especially when it comes down to you're 6 months into initiatives and you need to look back into the first month for something. That's when meeting minutes are very important. Also, in the formation of the team, you need to create a charter or a terms of reference, and this should list and outline all the other required positions of the general members with their roles and responsibilities. The responsibilities should be distributed as equitable as you can among the standard team members. This charter is something you're going to refer back to a lot. It can change, it can be a living document, but you really should get something down on paper. This just helps frame everyone's mind. Everyone knows what they're doing. No one can say they didn't know they're responsible for something because it's right there in the terms of reference of the charter. So the quality improvement team should allow for information to pass from it to the rest of the organization easily through meeting minutes, data, and reports. So when I was lead of a quality improvement team, what we did was we posted the meeting minutes both for staff in the staff room as well as a separate separate copy out front. This was in long-term care for the families to read if they were interested in it. We also did the same with our reports. The data, depending on the data, can be confidential. So that's kind of an asterisk slash caveat here, is that the data you can pass up internally, right, to management and whatnot, but be careful when you're sharing data to make sure you do it properly. All right, so typical implementation steps of team formation. Now keep in mind, this is in the perspective that there's a quality department, and I'll touch on that in a second. So once you know that there's a problem at hand, you've done your background information, you've compiled everything you need to before creating the team, you're going to conduct that first organizational meeting. You might not have the team members necessarily selected at this point, but you have key players from every department that can help assign team members if need be or help select them. Now 2 and 3, this is where I say we're looking at it from the perspective of a quality department. If there's multiple people who are capable of the position, you're going to select a leader or a chairperson to lead the initiative. If you're the only quality person in the organization, chances are you're leading it. I've also seen where, we'll say the supervisor is always the one leading it. There are times when you might pass this off to a non-quality associated person, depending on if there's a conflict of interest or not, or based on expertise. The same goes for selecting an administrator. That person, if it's a smaller organization, they know who they are. There's typically that one person who is very good at and takes pride in their meeting minutes and so on and so forth. So 4, educating the team members. So you've already done your background information, you've gone to the literature. Basically, you want to frame the problem for the team members once they've been selected so that they best understand it and the tools that you're working with. I found it's beneficial to even do kind of a PowerPoint presentation on the literature that you've read, framing the problem. This is what we're working with. This is where we are. Next, you're going to agree on and write a team charter in terms of reference. It's not always done as a group setting. Sometimes the lead chairperson will just write the terms of reference and then you'll present it, and team members get a chance to either agree with it or make changes if they would like. And then at the end, they all have to sign off on it. But yeah, and then the next part is assigning elements to the team. So that goes hand in hand with the terms of reference, assigning basically the objectives and parts of the project that everyone is responsible for. Next, if it's a bigger team, if it's a bigger project, you can appoint subcommittees. So subcommittees will branch off and tackle specific areas. So if you're looking at kind of an interdepartmental issue, you can have subcommittees for each department. And then those subcommittees can make their decisions and brief up into the actual quality team. It's just a good way to get more people involved without it becoming an organizational mess. So when the problem is really big, subcommittees are a valid way to better address that. Next, you're going to develop your implementation plan. So just like research, right? We're not going to go into anything and just kind of throw mud at the wall and see what sticks. We're going to develop a plan, and then we're going to follow that plan as best as we can. We can make changes along the way, but we are going to need to document everything that we do. This step is developing an implementation plan. We're going to talk about that in greater detail later on in the semester when we talk about program evaluation. Then we're going to hold routine meetings to monitor results and make necessary changes to ensure progress. So this can be, it just has to be routine. It can be quarterly, it can be monthly, it can be weekly. It just has to be routine and as required. So really interestingly, there is an internal development process of teams. Now, teams or groups It doesn't matter if it's quality, it doesn't matter if it's sports, it doesn't matter if it's um, military, whatever it is. Groups go through 5 stages of development en route to becoming a team. Um, it does occur every time a group comes together, and the speed though is going to differ, and there's different variables that play into this. So there's no one size fits all for this, but either way, a group will go through all 5 of these stages. The group may regress as members leave and new members join. So depending on where in the process that they are, a group can go right back to stage 1 if a good chunk of members either leaves the team for whatever reason or branches off. The 5 stages are stage 1, forming, stage 2, storming, stage 3, norming, stage 4, performing, and stage 5, ending. It's not just fun to say, but it has some good merit, and we're going to go through each stage now. Our first stage is forming. So this is where people become acquainted with one another, and what this does is it eventually determines a few things. The first thing it's going to do is determine that a person's place in the group. It's also going to outline how each member will contribute to success. The relationships between members are going to start forming at this stage, and the goals of the group are going to present themselves at this stage. It's really important to know that members may be hesitant to take the lead at this stage and often want to be told what to do. So you have to have, or you have to be ready to give a lot of direction here, because no one's going to want to misstep or really set themselves outside of the group by taking a chance at leading. The tasks in this stage. So from the quality perspective, the leader of the group, because this is your quality improvement team, you want to share expectations for the group. You want to develop the mission statement, the what and the how. So this is going to frame the goals of the group and how each member can contribute to success. And you want to identify group norms. You can consider this stage a success when there's acceptance of group members and commitment to the group and its success. Next, stage 2, we have storming. So resistance and arguments begin to materialize as group members become more comfortable with the group and start stating their opinions. Right? So the relationships have formed. People are less afraid to speak their mind. So you're going to run into the disagreements here. It also develops a working relationship amongst the team. As stated, personalities are going to start to emerge. You're going to have more frequent occurrences of conflict. You may also see attendance start to diminish, and this could be reflected in the conflict that is arising. You may also run into issues of tasks being left undone. So in that first stage, everyone's really happy and ready to go. Stage 2, the personalities have developed, and some people may be having enough of the group. They might want to start branching out. Maybe they find that the group's not for them. However, there are some tasks at this stage. The first is to determine the conflict resolution process for the group. As stated, conflict will arise, so you need to know how you're going to resolve that. You're going to shuffle committee members if needed. So the members who might be just creating conflict for the sake of creating conflict, boot them out now, right? Save the struggle, save the time. Make sure that if the conflicts arise and they're productive, that's fine. If unnecessary conflict is rising, people aren't gelling together, you'll have to shuffle committee members. At this point, you also want to reduce meeting times as required. You don't want to overburden members. The goal of this stage is to clarify the activities of the group and contribute towards the team's cohesiveness. So next we have norming, stage 3. So the group norms have been established at this point, and the group now functions more effectively. So we had that conflict that's been resolved, and now we have our group norms. The team identification is apparent, and now we're really seeing progress occur. Attendance has rebounded, and the trust among members is increasing. Remember, as you go through adversity with a group of people, people tend to get closer. They work better together. This is where this starts to occur. And then also what I find is as soon as a group starts making a little bit of progress, everyone gets more motivated. and they jump back on board of the team. Tasks for this stage, so you can invite guests to meetings to gauge interest for both the initiative itself, or even you're looking to add team members. It could be possible to invite guests to see how both the interests involved and how they jive with the team. So you're going to present to and receive feedback from stakeholders. So the people, typically the end users or board of directors, anyone who has this kind of skin in the game for the initiative, who aren't on the team, you're going to present and get feedback from. You're going to investigate alternative processes and methods of decision making. This is specifically or particularly important if it hasn't been working in the past. So the goal of this step is to gain internal support and acquire involvement from external sources. So especially that presenting to stakeholders, this is critical at this stage. Stage 4 is performing. So the team is now operating at full capacity. There's shared leadership. We've kind of torn down the walls of a formal leader, and everyone takes a turn based on the skill set and the expertise that's needed at that time. Team members are now familiar with their roles. They work well together and cooperatively, and they are fully committed to the team. At this point, what we are doing is we're planning for transition. So the project may be coming to an end. The team may be kind of coming to the end of its formation. So how does it look to transition it into something more long-term? At this point, we're also going to re-examine the mission, essentially the mission statement, and evaluate the progress to date. We're making those necessary adjustments as they appear in evaluation. So typically this is when the initiative's been rolled out and we're gauging to see how successful it was. At this point, we can start ensuring the team has pride in their work and accomplishments. That's how we know that we've really been successful, is when the team looks back at that work and they want to be associated with the work that goes on. Right, that shows that they're proud of what they did. So lastly, we have stage 5, which is ending. So it's not always technically a stage, but basically this is just when the team has either done its job and is now dissolving, or it's a simple mass change among the team, right? A big change of roster. Team is rebuilding. It occurs when a team is given a new set of goals or after significant downtime, which may contribute to the team roster changing significantly. When this happens, members could start to disassociate with the team and the project at hand, so they don't show the interest they once did. If the team does continue after something like this happens, they typically start back at stage 1 and they have to go all the way through the cycle again. Overall, though, typically what we see is at this point, the task is complete and the team dissolves. All right, so thank you for listening this week. I know there was a lot of stuff kind of thrown at you, some stuff that was outside of change that probably could have belonged in the team section, but like I said, I try and keep with the textbook chapter so that for those who want to read through the textbook and know exactly where things are coming from, that's how it's organized. That being said, that concludes the lecture for this week. I'm hoping to have the assignment descriptions out at some point this week, if not early next week, just so that for those who want to, they can get a head start on it. Please don't hesitate if you have any questions. It's better to tackle questions now than days before the exam. Yeah, don't leave it to the last minute. Have a good week.